I took the elevator to the room he swore didn't exist. The alert blinked on our shared calendar at 7:18 p.m. Client Strat 800 until. It landed in the square like someone laying a card just so, then sat perfectly still as if stillness could be its alibi. 2 minutes later, a text from Nathan. Don't wait up, might turn into a late one. Love you. Read he always wrote the last two words like he was clocking out of honesty. The onions I'd meant to soften went gold and bitter in the pan while I watched the blue bubble fade. The television murmured at a volume you choose to keep the apartment from thinking too hard. I moved the pan off the heat and told the counter this was ordinary. The counter declined to comment. When my phone vibrated again, the name wasn't his. Unknown number. A single line. If he's in a strategy session, his strategy is wearing a red dress on the 21st floor. Below it, a photo, cropped like an apology. The corner of a rooftop bar, a glass sweating, a sliver of a shoulder strapping itself into a dress that looked like a rumor, and the edge of a man's jaw I knew better than mine. You can recognize anyone from the way they hold a glass when they're trying not to be recognized. Who is this? I wrote back. Someone who owes you a favor, the stranger said. Get here before the elevator changes its mind. The afterimage of the onions followed me to the door. The city had settled into the hour where ambition takes off its shoes. The block with the hotel on it had learned to smile without moving. In the elevator, a mirror kept practicing what it would say to me if it had a mouth. I watched the numbers out of loyalty. The rooftop bar was curated to be expensive at the angle you take photos. I stood under a heat lamp that was pretending to be the sun and scanned the room like a person who had rehearsed never doing that. If I'd ever told you Nathan had bad taste in secrets, I would apologize now. He was leaning on the rail, his profile doing what it always did to rooms, a woman at his elbow. He turned a fraction. Her hand landed on his wrist the way you do when you're preventing someone from leaving and calling it conversation. I felt the small, precise creature in my chest erect itself and pour a drink. A hand closed on my shoulder before I could decide whether my legs had a plan. The voice that owned it was a low chuckle against my ear. He'll be fun to watch until he decides he's a better story than The View. I turned and put two names into a face I knew only in adjectives. Silas smiled without rushing. We. Shaken hands once at a fundraiser we hated for the same reasons. He'd been standing at the edge of a circle, making that rare sport of letting himself be hunted. He wore the kind of suit you don't buy unless you've ended at least one contract with a sigh. The smile now was a hinge. I knew it would swing either way if I pushed. Lucky night, he said. I needed a witness who knows how to take a photograph without believing in it. Did you send the text? I said. He nodded toward Nathan. I sent the mercy. Your man sent the content. Nathan's jaw did the thing it does when he's choosing his next sentence like it matters what language wants. The woman leaned in. He didn't lean away. The heat lamp hummed a pitch I didn't have a use for. Silas said, do you want a drink before or after the part where your body remembers it's allowed to exist? I don't answer quizzes from men who approach me like I'm a solution, I said. I don't ask quizzes unless the answer is in your mouth, he said, smile widening by one tooth. Come down a floor. The lobby camera won't see if you take the service stairs. I'll leave the door on the latch. He brushed my sleeve with his knuckles like it was an accessory to be checked for readiness and melted back into the other lives, leaving me with the problem of the elevator and my legs. On the 21st floor, a hallway held its breath. At the 6th door, the latch kept its promise. Inside, the room had already decided to be the kind that preens for its own reflection. Silas stood by the window, hands in his pockets, jacket off, shirt open one button farther than a polite man would plan, which is how you know the plan was honest. "I don't know you well enough to make this mean anything," I said. I didn't sit down. He watched the part of me that hadn't closed the door. "That's the preference," he said. "Meaning shows up with luggage." "I'm not a revenge tourist," I said. "Good," he said, crossing the carpet in 3 easy decisions. "I don't do coupons." He came near enough to see what color I could afford not to turn. He didn't touch me right away. When he did, it was the jaw first, the lightest thumb along a line that had memorized indignation and wasn't tired of it yet. It wasn't the kind of touch that demanded or pleaded. It asked, politely, whether anything about this wanted to be believed. Maybe the stupidity is that the answer flickers like a neon sign, and you can still hope it's a power surge. He said low, "I'll stop where you like, or where you won't admit." "You're very proud of your verbs," I said, and that was when he kissed me, mouth parted just enough to make a map. He tasted like moss and the kind of scotch that forgives you for the first lie if you tell the second one slowly. I let him find the back of my neck, where a pulse practices its audition without saving anyone's number. We both kept enough distance to pretend we were making ethical choices. He didn't unbutton anything I couldn't politely rebutton. When his palm found my hip bone through cloth, I remembered the body as a place, not a prop. I reminded him I had teeth. He rewarded me with a laugh that did not ask me to be anyone else. "Do you want to know why I texted you?" he asked into the corner of my mouth. "Later," I said, and we both smiled because later is the word you use when the room has taken off its sensible shoes, and nobody has found the camera yet. We pulled apart before the part where would have turned into was. He sat on the bed and kept his hands to himself as if he trusted them. I took a breath that made the room decide to be more generous with oxygen. The door latch made a sound like a confession clearing its throat. Nathan stood there, hands still on the handle, eyes taking inventory and not pretending to be interested in the furniture. The minute took its time deciding how much of itself to be. He looked at the shirt buttons I hadn't undone. My mouth did something I could claim was defensive. The silence tried on outrage, vengeance, virtue. It vetoed all 3 and opted for curiosity. He said, "I was going to tell you." I said, "You paid the check first." Silas said nothing, which is an art that requires more training than it gets. He looked at my shoulder like it was useful information, and then at Nathan like a gentleman who recognizes baton handoffs. Nathan shut the door behind him, as if the room were a patient we were discussing outside the ICU. He didn't come closer. He didn't move away. He rested his head against the wood and spoke to it. "Her name's Veronica," he said. "She writes the checks that keep my boss from pretending he's a god. She will never leave the man whose mouth says the word strategy like it includes me." "You brought her dressed to the roof," I said. "She asked to see the skyline," he said. "You asked to be a character," I said. "I asked to be forgiven in advance," he said, lifting his head, letting me read the part of him I had thought I'd memorized. "I wanted to send you proof of my worst self before someone else did. I wanted to be held guilty while I could still be held." Silas stood, finally, and the shift of him was the polite kind of thunder. "You're both very good at the chapter where a person explains himself in exchange for his dignity," he said. "I'd rather not be part of the appendix." Nathan's mouth twitched toward humor and chose remorse. "You texted him, didn't you?" he said to Silas. Silas half bowed. "I texted him that he could borrow some air." "You've been flirting with his panic for a year," Nathan said. "And you've been flirting with the idea of betraying him longer than that," Silas said. "Tell me I'm wrong." No, Nathan said, and the no had the shape of a man's back when it decides to take the weight it has been avoiding. He looked at me in a way that made better use of the mirror than most people do. I wanted to go as far as I could without having to learn new words for what that meant. You wanted the edge, I said. I wanted to belong to a story, he said. I wanted to prove I could stop. Did you? I asked. He licked his lip the way he does to retrieve a sentence's flavor. At the elevator, he said. I told her I had to fill a square on a calendar I had made for the purpose. I had thought to be the only liar tonight, Silas said mildly. You sent the photo to yourself, I said to Nathan, because the angle of it finally made its admission. You did it so I would come. I did it so I wouldn't have to choose between hurting you in the morning and hurting you in a way that let you answer at night, he said, not taking his eyes off mine. I knew if Cade or anyone else ever involved himself, the aftermath would belong to them for a decade. Silas is not Cade, I said. No, Nathan said, he's better at it. Silas put his hands up like a surgeon leaning back from a stubborn repair. If you're going to throw me under a bus, at least cite your sources, he said. I texted. I did not audition. You left the door on the latch, Nathan said. I left the door open because he deserved a room that wasn't trying to be virtuous, Silas said, glancing at me and staying there longer than necessary. And because, after a year of watching you cosplay restraint, I grew tired of his good manners being the only thing keeping you together. You don't get to prefer my drama, I said, and surprised myself with the steadiness in it. Silas bowed again, small and precise. Noted, he said. If either of you wants an exit where dignity is a prop we leave behind on purpose, call me. Tonight you have other furniture to move. When he left, the room returned to us like a verdict that wanted to hear the closing argument again. Nathan came 2 steps closer and put his hands in his pockets and took them out, as if performing competence. I don't get points for not sleeping with her, he said. No, I said, that isn't how points work. I don't get to rage that you came up here, he said. No, I said. I do get to say, I wanted to be caught on the way to a mistake I couldn't unmake, he said. You just did, I said. He started to laugh and stopped. I love you, he said. I also want to know whether my life is still a room where interior decoration is allowed. It is, I said, but we're changing the paint while you're still inside. He reached for me and paused. We closed the distance without bragging. I kissed him, not because the kiss would absolve us, but because the mouth is where you put your breath when you have run out of reasons to be clever. He said my name the way the elevator says the floor you weren't sure you wanted. His hands at my waist felt like the opposite of an apology. He didn't take my shirt off. He didn't need to. It was enough to remember that heat is allowed to mean hunger without meaning threat. We stayed there until the faint burn from the onions had left my tongue. When we separated, a hotel siren somewhere below tried on importance. Nathan put his forehead against mine and smiled in a way I hadn't seen since the winter we learned which parts of each other liked to be named. I made the calendar square say client because I couldn't think of a word for wanting to ruin the night carefully, he said. Make tomorrow's square say we buy a plant and keep it alive, I said. Make one say you can tell me something dangerous and keep breathing. Make one say I can want without sounding like I'm applying for a grant. He nodded as if the mirror had suggested a better angle. He took my wrist and turned it over, and the pulse there was a confession no one would have to testify about later. At home, the apartment remembered what onions are for. We ate late with our knees touching, like a map we were revising with a pencil. He told me that Veronica was a good person made sharper by money, and that he had wanted to stand in her orbit just to see whether gravity always worked. I told him Silas had kissed me like a patient reader. He didn't flinch. He let himself be hurt in proportion to the truth, which is the only math I believe in because it refuses decimals. We didn't promise anything that needed a notary. He took his phone out and deleted the rooftop photo and sent me a new one of our kitchen table with a candle I hadn't noticed lighting the center. He wrote, "Room exists," and I believed him because the glass of water next to it had my fingerprints on it. When we went to bed, he slept with his hand on my ribs, just above the place where breath enjoys being counted. Before he fell under, he said, "Tell me tomorrow is allowed." I said, "Only if it doesn't look like tonight." He laughed into the pillow the way people laugh when their bodies have voted to try again. There are nights that ask to be testimony and nights that ask to be rumor. This one decided it needed to be the second chapter of something that refused to say its title out loud. In the morning, the calendar square was empty, not like absence, but like an invitation that might be a map. I poured coffee, added a touch of honey, and watched him blink himself back into the version of the man who can stand up. He reached for the cup, sipped, and said my name without notes. I said his like a location. He grinned, small and human. "We tell the truth," he said. "Without bleeding," I said. "With mercy," he said. "Without a camera," I said. We agreed that would do for a Monday. If the elevator had ears, it kept the secret. The room, cleaned and aired, went back to pretending it was for sleeping. And the city, which knows more than it says, arranged the light on our table so that even the plant we hadn't bought yet felt included in the conversation.